This is a story that comes from Costa Rica. It's a fairy tale, and it starts out this way. There was once a king who had a son, and he and his wife used to wake up early in the morning and wonder who he was going to marry. They were very concerned, and as he got older and older, they had a hard time going to sleep at night. And so finally one morning, the king stayed longer at breakfast, and when the prince came down to have his toast, the king said, "I'm going to have a dance tonight, and I want you to choose a local girl. Please just choose one or two that you want to spend some time with, because you need to find a wife, because I'm not getting any younger." Well, they had the party, and lots of girls came, and they were beautiful, and they were friendly, and he had a really nice time. They did a lot of contra dancing that night, which means that he got to dance with all the girls. And the night ended, and everybody went home, and the next morning the king said, "Did you see anyone that you liked?" And the prince said, "Dad, I didn't." And the king said, "All right, that's it. You have to pack your bags, and you have to go, and do not come back until you have a bride." So the prince went up to his room, and he pushed a bunch of things into a rucksack, cloth bag, and he asked for his horse to be made ready, and he set off down the road riding. And it was a day when people were coming to the market, and so he noticed there were lots of folks riding up in the front of carts and walking alongside donkeys, and all kinds of vegetables and items and earrings out in the lobby, and CDs and cassettes, and all kinds of things were coming into the market. And they had a special on T-shirts that day too. And he loved seeing all that. He didn't feel so lonesome seeing all those people all around him. And after a while, he started noticing it was very dusty, and because of all the horse and the traffic and the bicycles going by. And so he started looking for something to drink. And did I tell you that he went through a forest after he'd been gone from his palace for about half an hour? He had gone through a forest about half an hour after he left home, and there was an orange tree on the edge of that forest. And he had picked 3 oranges, and he'd pushed them into his bag. So when he got thirsty, he did not remember the oranges. He was looking for water, and he couldn't find any. And that's when he remembered the oranges. So he pulled over, got off the horse, took his knife from his back pocket, and he cut open the first orange. And as soon as he cut it open, there standing in front of him was a very beautiful young woman. She had hair the color of a red hibiscus flower. She had eyes that were green like the water you might find in the forest in the shade on a day when the sun had clouds in front of it. She came out of nowhere. She came out of that orange. She came out of nowhere. And she looked at him and said, "¿Tienes algo para tomar?" He said, "No, I don't have anything to drink." She said, "¿Tienes agua?" He said, "No." She disappeared. He ate the orange. Got back on his horse, and he went riding. And then he got thirsty again, and he was looking for water. And he cut open the second orange, and here was a lovely young woman who looked like she was related to the first girl. She had brown hair and dark eyes, and she said, "You have some agua?" He said, "No, no tengo agua. Yo estoy aquí quiero comer esta naranja porque no tengo agua. And she said, por favor, tienes un poquito de agua. He said, eres tan linda. And she disappeared. He got back on his horse. He went riding. And the next time he got thirsty, he walked longer and came to a shady place, and he could hear that sound of water. And he went down and tied his horse to a tree, and then he got water, and he gave it to his horse. And then he stooped down, and he got water. And then he remembered the third orange. Ladies and gentlemen, things are looking up. And he cut open the third orange. And zingo, zango, there was a most lovely, beautiful young woman. And she looked like she had two sisters who had previously appeared and disappeared. And she had hair the color of the sun. And she had blue, blue eyes. And she said, ¿Tienes un poquito de agua? He said, as a matter of fact, I do. And he got some water and held it to her lips. And then he got some more and held it to her lips and watched her drink. And then when she was no longer thirsty, he said, come and sit in the shade with me. And he said, my father has sent me away from home, and I am not to go back until I have a bride. Would you be my bride? She said, yes. She said, and which is who put me in that orange, and you have broken the spell. I will go anywhere with you. Thank you. He helped her up on the horse, and they rode home. And all the people of the town, they saw him coming back because they didn't think they'd see him so soon. But they saw him coming back, and immediately they started packing picnic baskets because they figured there was going to be a wedding and a potluck to boot. So they packed their baskets, and he went to the palace, and he introduced his young bride, and the king was very excited, was looking forward to getting to know her. And then the king looked out the window and saw all the neighbors coming with their thermoses and travel cups and plates and chopsticks and baskets and things to have, because they were not using paper products anymore. Or we could say they didn't have paper products then. You had to trade in your metal toothpaste tube to get the next tube of toothpaste. I learned that in Megan's workshop today. That was during World War II. Metal tubes of toothpaste, and you couldn't get the next tube until you brought in the old one. Things have changed, ladies and gentlemen. They had a fabulous feast. They had a wonderful wedding. And the king and his bride had a lovely night. And they settled down. And the king and his wife got a lot more sleep. And they eased into their retirement. And their son became the king. One day, the king went hunting. And the witch, who had changed the girl and put her in an orange, along with her invisible, non-existent sisters, she came by the palace because she didn't like it that that young girl was not in an orange anymore. And so she fixed a basket with pins and ribbons and came going along to the palace, calling it out that she had those things to sell. And the queen came to the window, and she saw an old beggar woman with ribbons coming out of a basket, and she sent a servant down to welcome her into the palace. The old woman showed the queen her ribbons, and then she showed her some of the pins that she had for holding on a hat or holding on a crown, and she said to the princess, here, look at this one, it's a pearl. Go ahead and put your head down, and I will fix it in your crown. And the witch pushed that long pin with a pearl on the end straight into the queen's head, and she changed into a white dove. The dove flew out the window. The beggar woman was escorted out of the palace. Nobody saw the queen change into a bird. The king was hunting, and all of a sudden, up above his head with his friends, he heard a sound of leaves rustling. And he looked up, and there was the most beautiful white dove. And he thought, I will take that bird home to my wife. And so he took aim, and not to kill the bird, but just to knock it down, to perhaps knock it unconscious. And so he pulled back his bow and arrow, and he sent the arrow straight, and it just enough went by, didn't go into the bird, but it did push the bird off the ground, off the branch, and she fell, and his servants rushed up, and he said, catch that bird. And they caught it, and they held it in their hands, and they brought it to the king, and he held it in his hands, and he smoothed his thumb over the top of that bird's head, and he did not feel the pearl pin. And he looked in the eyes of that bird, and he gave it to his servants, and they put it inside a sack, a cloth sack, and they went home. And he ordered for a cage to be brought up to his room, and he put the bird in the cage and gave it some water. And then he took the cage and went looking for his wife in the palace. And he couldn't find her. He looked everywhere, and nobody knew where she had gone. And his heart broke. And he put that cage in the room where he spent his long days reading or taking care of some kind of something for the town. It was where when people came to visit him, they saw that bird in the cage, in the window. And time passed. And one day, the king was looking at the bird, and she was quiet. And he opened the cage door, and he put his hand in, and he took that sweet bird out. And he took her to the window, and he said, "You have been my only companion ever since my wife disappeared." And he looked in the eyes of that bird, and then he was smoothing over the top of the head, and that's when he felt the pearl pin. And he pulled it with his fingers, and he pulled it out of her head. And zingo, zango, there was his wife standing in front of him. And he took her in his arms and held her close. He said, "I didn't know where you had gone." And she said, "You must send soldiers to kill the witch, because she will not let me live in my own shape." And the king said, "I will take care of it." And he did send soldiers. He put the pin on the window to remember. He sent soldiers, but the witch somehow heard they were coming. And she was in such a bad temper. Maybe you've had a day like that. But she was in such a bad temper, and she was making tamales, and she was in a hurry, that she pushed those tamales and pushed long wood underneath them to raise the heat of the fire, and a spark jumped out of that stove, and it caught on the grass rug in front of the stove, and it caught fire, and her whole house, and she went up into dust. And the king and his bride they settled down. And she always kept in a drawer a pincushion where she kept that really long pin that had taken away her shape and taken away her life. And they lived a good and long time, and they ruled for the benefit of all.